Hi, it's Jerry Roberts back with episode 289 of Newsmakers and the Plague Year. And today we're going to be talking about schools and COVID. And we are joined by Kate Ford, member of the Santa Barbara Unified School District. Kate, thanks for being with us. I know it was a long meeting last night. Let me ask you, we got some breaking news. Say again?
That it was.
So we got breaking news that Tony Thurmond, the state superintendent of public instruction, all rise, says most California schools should not reopen if COVID-19 trends continue. What's your reaction to that?
Well, my reaction is that this is what a lot of people have been asking for. They've been asking for more guidance from the state because really with regard to schools, the last time we got serious guidance was about closing down. And there's been a lot of other things that have happened in the meantime, especially earlier this week when the governor shut everything down, and then we continue to have, or lots of things down, and then we continue to have conversations about opening school. So I think at least if we can get some specific guidelines from the, whether it's Thurmond or Newsom, this will be really helpful. I think a lot of boards, a lot of school districts feel like they're going to give it their best shot, but they need a little bit of help.
Yeah, well, it was quite an epic meeting last night. He had like 900 people on the Zoom call and I don't know, 70 people in public comment, and you heard from a lot of experts on various perspectives of the virus. What was your takeaway from that meeting?
Well, and let's not forget that the board also received probably well over 100 letters before the meeting. So we had lots of information and lots of feedback going forward. I guess I would just say that, you know, and if you got a chance to see my questioning, I'm most concerned a little bit about the logistics. I think, and I remember saying this to you a long time ago, that I think educators can take care of educating, but the logistics of how to keep track of kids, how to address issues around when a child or a teacher is sneezing or coughing or has a sore throat, and then about the slowness of testing that we have in this county right now, and the even slower results. It just seems like we would be really exposing kids and teachers and school staff to lots of things that sound fairly unacceptable to me. And then we had lots of also concerns about distance learning, and we had heard this already, and I think this is a really legitimate concern, is that we were in, you know, crisis mode in the springtime, but we're not in crisis mode regarding distance learning right now. So if the decision is to go with distance learning, we have to get this right.
Well, you have to get it right, and you kind of have to get it quick too. I mean, you're not set to make a final decision until what, July 29th? And then
no, next week, the 21st.
Okay, on the 21st. Because my takeaway on that meeting was there are no good choices here. I mean, it was heartbreaking to listen to some of the parents and the single mom, you know, who's like, I gotta work, what am I supposed to do? And then you have teachers who are obviously feeling like their health is at risk. I mean, did you hear anything in that meeting that made you feel confident that it would be a good idea to reopen the school building?
No, not confident. I'm still interested in the ideas around, especially around trying to make something happen for primary students, kindergarten through second grade. I just think that's such a tough age, but it's also a tough age to monitor in terms of health. But no, nothing that gave me total confidence. And between friends and relatives who are in the medical field, they're not giving me any confidence either. So I'm really trying to listen to all the people who are real experts on COVID-19. And even this morning, I was texting with a friend who's an ER doc in the Valley, and she was basically saying, whose lives are you going to watch over? You know, it's not safe right now. And we don't have any reason to believe that the surge is going to stop anytime soon. So to your point about this decision has to be made quickly, and we have to be ready to pivot. If something great happens and we decide to go away from distance learning and back to a hybrid, or hard to imagine, but maybe 5 days a week, face-to-face, we should be able to do that. But given the information we have right now, I wouldn't.
Well, and I thought your question really was an important one, because it sort of got to the next level of the complications and complexities of this, which is, okay, so if we go back hybrid and the 2 days a week the kids are there, they're all going to be in a cohort of maybe 8 or 10 kids. And then if one kid gets sick, then they all have to quarantine for 14 days and the teacher has to quarantine. So presumably his other or her other cohort would have to, and then who's the decision maker on when they get to come back? Who's healthy enough to come back? So it was just, the more and more you sort of drilled down on it, the more complicated and difficult a task it began to seem.
Right, and I know principals and teachers, but in particular on this particular sort of administrative aspect, I know teachers and principals would really like to be very well organized and thoughtful and accurate about all of this, but it sounds like a huge job. And I started to wonder if we're going to have to hire a lot of people just to track illnesses. And the point, I don't know if you actually said it right this minute, but my point was also that, say you send somebody home, you send little Jerry Roberts home because he says he has a sore throat and he's coughing. He may not be able to get a test for a few days. We don't know if he has COVID-19 or if he's just trying to get out of doing some work or he has a flu. And so then this number of days passes. This is the part that's really tough for me, is when days pass and nobody knows anything. And then either the child doesn't have COVID-19, somehow you find that out maybe 10 days later, and everything goes back to people feeling safe and secure, or they find out this child had it. And then you've had a number of days where nothing has happened except that maybe you've been a little bit on alert that little Jerry's been out. I think it's very tough.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're certainly one who would believe that this is not a good time to reopen the school building.
It's hard for me to imagine. I'm trying to be super thoughtful about this, and people who know me know that I really want to be, I want to be in the room where it happens, like from the musical Hamilton, and I want to be thinking really creatively, but every time I think of something that I think might be helpful, I personally run into a roadblock too. So I don't think this is easy, and I understand about how parents, especially single parents, really need some help with their kids at home. And perhaps that's what we should be focusing more on, rather than the question of go to school, don't go to school, is how to give people help. And I think that's where we could be particularly interesting and creative. And perhaps we can, as you and I have talked about before, this is an amazing town. If it can happen, it should be able to happen in Santa Barbara. So. Right.
So rather than, putting our resources and our thought and all of our efforts into figuring out, what, because the other piece is, okay, so say we reopen the buildings now and then have to shut them down next week. I mean, the instability of it. I mean, let's make a decision one way or the other, and then focus on how to deal with that. Because there were some interesting suggestions last night about things you could do outdoors. For example, maybe with kindergartners, you could do phys ed or art,
right,
all kinds of things that would not necessarily be in the classroom. The other point that I heard from a lot of teachers was, we don't really have, I mean, when we had to do this distance learning and ramp it up in the spring, obviously we weren't prepared for this. We invented it on the fly. What is your understanding of where we are with platforms that would be more effective for teachers to be using in distance learning now than they were in the spring?
Well, I think that, again, I think lots of things in the spring were sort of Band-Aid approaches. And now, even in a conversation I had with Ms. Maldonado this morning, the idea is to get serious and find out where the best platforms are. What are they? There are, as you know, across the country, thousands of homeschools that do this pretty well. So it's sort of like what we were just saying, like you've got to redirect some resources here and figure out what's the best use of resources. All of us could spend hours and hours and hours trying to make the hybrid schedule really work. And then we'd have to send everybody home possibly. There would be a lot of lost time that perhaps we could have spent figuring out the best platforms.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, the other thing that I found interesting about last night on reflection, and it's so helpful, even though it's sometimes frustrating, it is so helpful to hear from people, because to your point, we did hear lots of interesting ideas. And one idea, or one sort of statement that has happened a number of times, is about children. And on this one, I just would ask everybody to be very cautious about what they say about COVID-19 and children, because let's remember that kids have been out of school since March. So there isn't really any data about kids. So people will say, oh, but kids don't transfer it or transmit it, and kids don't get it and all of that. We don't know that. Around the world, kids have been out of school. So I just don't want us to jump to conclusions about what's going to happen when kids come to school.
Yeah, I am so tired of listening to people's opinions about this who do not have degrees in epidemiology, I have to say. And I just wish they would all STFU, because it's not helping anything. And we really ought to listen to medical experts. And one last night, it was a Dr. Brennan, is that his?
Yes.
Pediatrician, said two things that I thought were very important. One was, don't forget that we're going to have a flu season, and
Right.
then it's going to be impossible to sort out. Not impossible, it's going to be extremely difficult to sort out who's got the flu and who's got COVID and who's got both, because he said there was something like, what, a 40% overlap in those things. And then the other thing that he said that I thought was important was, he said, look, nobody is going to ever criticize you for doing the conservative, for taking care of the kids. If, we're not all safe, no one's safe until we're all safe, is basically the thrust of what he was saying. And I thought that really was an important notion to interject into the conversation.
Right. But there also is this underlying, and I think it's unfortunate, sort of message that a lot of people are sharing, which is, teachers, get back to work. Come on, you're supposed to be there. Schools have got to reopen. Who are you? Why are you lazy? Are you ignorant? You know what you need to do. And I just think it's so much more complicated than that. We saw a survey from the Kaiser Family Foundation. It's very reputable, and said that 1 out of 4 teachers are at risk of severe reactions or severe infection from COVID-19. We've got to be thinking about not only the kids, but the teachers and the school staff too. They deserve to be in the safest possible environment. And I feel like some people are just sort of blowing off that aspect of it.
Well, I think part of that, at least as I heard some of the comments last night, is that people feel that the California Teachers Association, which is probably the most powerful special interest lobby in Sacramento, decided last week, or at least put out this letter
Yes.
to the governor last week saying, hey, it ain't safe. And they represent 300,000 teachers or something in the state of California. So in a sense, I sort of thought that was the game right there, because if the union's saying don't do it, and so, I kind of felt like, well, maybe people don't like unions, these are all union ideas and stuff. But to listen to the teachers and their human stories, whether they were, young women who maybe have a newborn or a baby at home or are thinking of it, or people who live in communal situations, there's more to it than this just being a union goon play here, I think.
I think so too. And certainly I've had my concerns throughout my career here and there about the union, and so have lots of people. But I actually, I have to keep reminding myself that that's actually the best thing that a union can do, is keep its members safe. So if they have been actually only 100% focused on keeping their members safe, then this their stand makes sense to me. But the other thing is that I think a lot of people think sort of like this big 30,000-foot view of schools and of teaching. They have to reopen, they have, they have to do this, they need to improve, they blah, blah, blah. And I think that, that usually when you ask Americans about schools and improvement, they say, oh yeah, they've got to improve. But then you ask them about the teachers they know and the schools that their kids go to, and they have a much kinder, more understanding approach to, a more personal approach to these people. And I think I'd like to just keep reminding everyone that these, like you're saying, these are people, and they have as many issues and concerns as any parent does. And yeah, they all have to be considered, regardless of the union.
I mean, one of the other difficult issues that I heard last night people talking about was parents of special needs kids who either need one-on-one interaction or some other special resource that the school's giving. What were your thoughts on how that gets handled if the schools don't reopen?
Well, I don't have any good answers, except that I've always, for now, like months and months, as you know, we were also hopeful it wouldn't be months and months and months, but for months I've been thinking about, in particular, 3 groups, and that's special education students with disabilities, and also English learners, and also those primary kids. And I do think that there has to be a whole other set of work that is done to try to meet their needs. And again, with this idea of being more creative, like I don't want to go outside of what union requirements are or health requirements, etc. But these particular students probably deserve a more personalized kind of approach. Do we need to go to their houses? Can we go to their houses? Do we need to have them come to school in a very, very tiny group that's very socially distanced with, say, plexiglass and things like that? Maybe, because those kids are, their parents really need some help.
So to go back to your point about, let's put our resources in the right place. So rather than, spending hours and hours and days figuring out, well, how do we disinfect the classroom every 12 hours? We're now thinking about, what are the best platforms for remote learning? What kind of special education needs are there? What are some of the other issues that we ought to be focusing on if we do not, if we go 100% distance learning to start?
Well, probably the one that you mentioned that we talked about last night, which is just the record keeping and just contact tracing and keeping track of everyone. And then, of course, I think there's the social emotional side that we'll have to address no matter what. We've got to make sure kids are eating and that kids are, that we're having, some kind of opportunities for kids to interact with others, especially those that are alone at home, or anything regarding childcare and caring for children, I think has to be another big issue.
So Hilda Maldonado, our new superintendent, started on July 1st. Welcome to the NFL. This is a great way to start your career in Santa Barbara. How's she doing so far? What's your sense?
My take is that she's doing great because, first of all, she has which we knew we'd have to have, is someone who has a lot of energy. She has a lot of energy. The second thing I noticed is that she's courageous. She's a risk taker. As I mentioned, I had a conversation with her today, and she's really ready to try some new and different things that sometimes when you've been around a place for a long time, you don't think of just because you've been around the place for a long time. So I think she's a risk taker. She has a lot of energy, and she is willing to listen. She is spending so much of her time listening to people in the community, listening to board members listening to her staff that she will do well to, you know, sort of stay on that path as a listener, an energetic, enthusiastic, can-do risk taker.
So I don't mean to pry, but so when you had this conversation with her, was she, let me pry into that a little bit, was she kind of just taking your temperature about where you are on this opening versus closing thing? Did she express a strong view?
Well, it was a conversation. So I think she was interested, which is nice for me. I think she was interested in my opinion.
And a new experience on the school board.
Well, in a way. But so she was very interested, but also I was really interested in getting feedback to her. And she was also very candid and honest with me, which was a little bit of a new experience. So, you know, we had exchange of ideas. I think that we're really in agreement on so many things. And while she wants to take a temperature, I think she wanted to float a couple ideas by me. And they were ones that are so, to me, so thoughtful and appropriate next steps that I felt really very confident that she could deal with this. I mean, we were talking, for example, about this idea, and believe me, it's not brand new. I'm sure it's happening everywhere, but this idea that district staff and certain other school staff have to be deployed in completely different ways. And, you know, that just is going to raise this bar, because I think during the, you know, the crisis period of the springtime, that there were a number of people who actually were directionless, let's say, or rudderless. Like they really didn't, they weren't teaching. So what were they doing? But she and I talked about this really powerful concept that a lot of people need to get out there and get to the schools and get to the parents and to the kids, so that, you know, maybe they're deployed in perhaps even different ways than their typical job description, but we're going to have to just do things completely differently.
Yeah, yeah. So the next thing as a practical matter that happens is that next Tuesday, the board will vote on, now in June 23rd, I think you voted to procedurally to go ahead with the hybrid model. So what will actually be before the board next Tuesday?
Well, just to clarify, what we ended up approving was to go ahead with planning the hybrid model. I know some people thought we had approved the hybrid model, but at that point we were still feeling a little shaky, as you can well imagine, about even hybrid, and now of course shakier still because of the state of the state. But so your question was what?
What will be the decision that the board takes? I mean, not how is it going to go, but what's the question going to be before you? Do you know how? I mean, is it going to be we're going to go 100% distance learning to begin the term, yay or nay?
I think that, and this is crystal balling, right? Because I don't know, but I think right now, from last night forward for the next 5 days, the leaders of the district, led by Hilda, will be scrambling to really firm up a proposal. And I think that in every likelihood, this proposal will involve something about starting with distance learning, but with the ability to pivot to hybrid learning in a nimble and reasonable way. That's what I would imagine at this point.
And the criteria for pivoting would presumably be based on data points that are set forth by the state, by the public health department. What's your understanding of how that works?
Well, this is where it gets really complicated, and without sounding like a complete nerd, I can say that I tried to stay up with this kind of information in particular, and that's where I think our county public health has got to really firm up how we can make sure that everyone who wants to get tested gets tested in a quick and easy way. And as you know, that's not really happening right now. But if there was a way that our county and the rest of the state could stay abreast of testing needs and could be quick on testing results, then we could do something like what we're hearing is happening in New York, which is they set a guideline, and that for schools to reopen. I think it is like no more than 5% of all those tested are positive.
In the community.
Hybrid.
In the community.
In the community.
Yes.
And that would that's another way that you could be so helpful to school districts, because right now we're thinking, well, it sounds like it's bad, or it sounds like it's getting better, and you know, but we don't have a bottom line. And I admire New York for just sort of setting that goalpost, because now everybody can work toward it, and then everybody can be unhappy with it or delighted with it, but at least there's something that's going to be consistent.
And the other interesting thing about this for a political writer is, you know, President Trump can have an opinion, and Gavin can have an opinion, and Tony Thurmond can have it, but all of these decisions are made on the local level, fortunately, I think. So it's really the school board. But then we looked at Goleta School Board tonight is going to be considering, as I understand it, a proposal to have 5 days a week in classrooms. The same thing at Montecito Union. Does that present a problem where maybe one kid's going to one school and another in another district?
It is. I think it's problematic. I think, you know, I have heard of other schools that are planning to go 4 or 5 days. Usually they're not high schools. And they're usually not big schools. So I think that makes it different for Santa Barbara Unified. But I also think that each of the ones that I've considered, or at least I've heard about going hybrid 4 or 5 days a week, I think, or no, just going full face-to-face 5 days a week, are schools that are have more funding than the average California school district. So there are a lot of things that are fluid and dynamic in this question. And honestly, I would say that this is Goleta is the perfect example of what we've been talking about. Like, they may have decided yesterday what this meeting was going to be about, but I would think that tonight this meeting might be a little different, right? You don't know.
No, you don't. You don't know day to day. You know, one of the really sad things last night, I thought, was hearing from a couple of students who were going into their senior year and saying, wait a minute, this is us. You can't do this to us. I mean, which really goes back to the question of there's no good choices here, I think.
That's right. It is sad. And I mean, I think that each of the spectrums, as I kind of mentioned before, are the toughest ones. Yes, seniors, how are they going to, you know, make the most of this absolutely important year of their lives, and a year where they have so many big decisions to make, and they, you know, they have to especially figure out about their vocations or their college education. And then the other end of the spectrum are these 5-year-olds who've never been to school before. And so someone says, oh, look on your laptop screen, that's your teacher, you know. So both of these aren't, these ends of the spectrum, they don't sound appealing at all to anybody. I think we have to accept that.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to go on a limb and suggest that next Tuesday, the school board is going to vote 5-0 to start the school year 100% distance learning, and then see how it goes from there. But do you want to second that? I
would say that in general, I don't play the lottery and I don't go to Vegas, but that might be a good bet.
Okay. Kate Ford, thank you so much for joining us today after another epic school board meeting. You're doing the Lord's work out there, all of you on the board. Oh, I meant to ask you one more thing. There was a parent survey, right, that was returned?
Yes.
What did that say?
Well, I guess it just went out yesterday or the day before. So we don't know the results, but I did get a parent that was concerned, like, am I actually signing up for something with this survey, or or you just want to take my temperature? And if that wasn't clear to parents, then I would guess that we'll get a lot of unanswered surveys, just because people, at least in my experience, are not willing to commit right now to anything. And so I want to clarify that with the district. I mean, the other thing that I want to mention, and which we've talked about, you and I briefly, but a lot of other people and I are sort of just testing these waters is when we talk about distance learning, is there some way that the community can get more involved? Grandparents, neighbors, retired teachers, retired administrators. Is there some way that we can help in those homes? Is there, you know, I called it a brigade. Is there some way we can mobilize? Because we're going to have to do something to show that we're serious about providing support.
The DLA, the Distance Learning Army. That's
Ta-da!
all right. Hey, thanks so much. We'll talk to you soon.